Have you ever had a side hustle? A side gig you picked up for fun, or maybe to earn a little extra cash? Maybe you had a lemonade stand as a kid, or like me, were fully immersed in the world of theater and dance, where each experience ignited my passion for the spotlight. As we transition from those early experiences into the professional world, some side gigs evolve into real passions, and sometimes even lasting careers. I've always been so curious about these stories, especially the less conventional journeys that redefine what a career can look like. They remind us that success isn't always a straight path, and that the heart behind our hustle can lead us to unexpected and fulfilling destinations. I genuinely love exploring how other people's passions have shaped their careers. If you're into that too, join me, Layla Palmer, as I chat with a captivating lineup of guests from various industries to uncover how they went from heart to hustle. A while ago during a journalism class, I stumbled upon an article from the University of Texas at Austin. It was a summary of a case study by their Center for Media Engagement titled, "Can Journalists Also Be Activists?" Intrigued, I clicked on it, skimmed through the article a bit, and then, like we all sometimes do, swiped back to my feed and continued mindlessly browsing. I didn't think much about it at the time. In fact, I hadn't thought about it again. That is, until I met Art Cohen. Art was one of my final professors in undergrad, and from the moment he introduced himself, his story stuck with me. On one of the first few days of class, Art shared pieces of his career journey with the students. What struck me most was how deeply personal and purposeful his work was. This wasn't just journalism for the sake of reporting. This was storytelling with a mission to create change. Today, I'm bringing you a conversation with Art Cohen, a journalist and filmmaker whose career blurs the line between reporting and activism. We'll explore his successes, the obstacles he faced, and what it means to be a journalist who isn't afraid to challenge the status quo.
Well, I think of myself career-wise as a broadcast journalist, and it's more than a career. It's been, a passion of mine to be a broadcast journalist and a journalist in general. And also, I've been an educator, something that came late in life. After I'd worked for a while in journalism, I found myself teaching. So I think there's a connection between being a journalist and being a teacher. You're interested in gathering a lot of information and helping people understand what's going on in the world. And so that's been kind of my passion. I discovered that I was gay when I was 12. And so that's been another major kind of life force for me as I was trying to manage that at a time when it was very difficult, when there really wasn't any gay rights movement and I didn't have any role models. So that's been the other part of my life, and in some ways that has merged with journalism, directly or indirectly. I became an activist after I did finally come out, and for a time I was on the board of directors for a publication called Gay Community News in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s, and it was a paper of record for, gay rights and gay activism. And I'm also on the board of a magazine called the Gay and Lesbian Review Worldwide, which has been publishing for 30 years. It publishes reviews of books and films and has several feature articles each month. So I'm on the board of that. I don't have a lot to do with the magazine or editing it, but I have been part of that for a long time. So those are ways that my being gay has also been intersecting with journalism.
Back in 1983, Art made a bold move to create Growing Up Gay, a documentary that captures the lives of 4 young adults navigating their queer identities in a world that wasn't yet ready to listen. But why did Art take this leap? What was it like to document stories that so few people were willing to hear? And what impact did this film have on the LGBTQ+ movement at the time? In our conversation, Art opens up about the pressures and the incredible drive that kept him going despite the challenges. I do want to talk about Growing Up Gay. It is a documentary that you made for WGBH Boston in 1983. So what was it like at that time in the 80s making a documentary that would have been considered controversial. What was that like for you and the crew and also the group of students that you worked with?
It was a very controversial subject at the time. The gay rights movement had been around for maybe a decade and was still kind of finding its footing and getting its message out. And it was generally widely believed in the popular press and among most people that if you thought you were gay in high school, you were probably wrong. You needed to give it time. It was just a phase. You needed to work it out. You couldn't know that you were gay in high school. That may tell you about what people understood at the time because, in fact, lots of people knew they were gay in high school. And so I wanted to do a film about kids who knew they were gay in high school like I did to kind of tell people that you could know, and you could know pretty certainly that you were gay in high school. I worked for WGBH in 1983. I'd been there already maybe 5 years as a reporter. And I'd covered a lot of different things from, issues on housing and politics. I covered the governor, all kinds of news stories. But I also, in that time, I covered some gay rights issues as well, and they let me do it. They were kind of an alternative news show. We were on at 10 o'clock. We tried to pick real issues that were facing the city and the state. And instead of a minute and a half to cover them, we were given 4 or 5 minutes as required. And so it was really a great job if you're a journalist. Yeah. It was kind of the ideal broadcast journalist situation. We had a camera crew, we had a couple of them, and we could go out and cover things. And we did cover breaking news, but we got to do longer focused stories, and they let me do some stories about the gay rights movement. I did a piece about a gay church. We interviewed the minister, went to a service. I did stories about gay youth who were homeless, that sort of thing. And so at some point, I moved from doing daily news to documentaries. And one of the first ones that I proposed was this documentary about gay youth, and they let me do it. Gave me a camera crew, gave me a budget. I approached the Boston area gay and lesbian youth group called Bagley, and I sought students who were willing to be interviewed. Now, none of the kids who were in school were willing to be interviewed, but I did find 4 kids who had just graduated or within a year or two had graduated and were willing to talk about it. There were 2 women and 2 men. I interviewed them and we showed them doing their thing. One of the women was an athlete. The other woman was just kind of a normal person, sort of negotiating her life at 19, trying to figure out what to do. The men, I think they were both in college at the time. And so I interviewed them and we showed their lives, and they were in many respects just kind of normal kids who said, well, I knew I was gay in high school. I'm still gay, that I'm not in high school. So I put that film together.
I was curious to know more about Art's experience working with the 4 documentary subjects. Luckily, Art read my mind and began to tell me about them. He also recalled their families and the public's response to growing up gay.
The woman who was an athlete, her parents were very upset, did not want the film to air. I believe they made an effort to go to court, which was unsuccessful. The station supplied the 2 local daily papers, the Boston Herald and the Globe, with a copy to review. And the morning that it was scheduled to be broadcast, the Globe came out with a glowing review about these brave young people willing to talk about being homosexual. And the Herald, which is a conservative paper, still published, trashed it and said, this is just propaganda. There's no way these kids are telling the truth. They couldn't have known they were gay. It's just propaganda from the Herald. Did you expect
that kind of response? Or were you and the crew optimistic that what you'd made would be received in some sort of positive light?
That's a great question. I think I was a little bit shocked at the level of negativeness of the Herald review. After that, I don't know that any other station picked it up or it got broadcast anywhere else, but that's how that film came into being.
The students who you chose to spotlight, did you keep in touch with them after the documentary to see what they thought of it, to see how it might have impacted them moving forward in life? What impact do you think it had, or do you know that it had on the
Well, I think immediately they were not surprised this is what they were used to, so it didn't shock them that the Herald had panned the film as much as it did. I think they were happy they did it. Obviously, they knew in accepting my invitation to be interviewed that they would face a certain amount of pressure and criticism, so they seemed ready for it. One of the women passed away, and the other one, I think I was in touch with her for a while, but I eventually lost touch with. But I'm actually still in touch with the two men who were in the film, and one of them remains a very close friend after all these years. He's much younger than me, but we're still very close, so we see each other quite a bit. He was fine. I mean, he was an activist, and he was expecting crazy pushback on that film. He was actually the president of Bagley at the time. So he was probably kind of already out and kind of used to it. And, he's done just fine. And the other one is out in California, and they're both married and have husbands and seem to be doing well in the world. And the other one I probably speak to once or twice a year.
Art Cohen has decades of experience in TV production and journalism, so it's safe to say that he has a large portfolio of projects under his belt. Let's hear more about some of those other projects he's worked on during his career and learn about the real purpose behind his work. What are those other projects that you're proud of?
Well, I did a film about the Orange Line here in Boston. There had been plans to build a huge multi-lane highway into the city to extend one of the existing highways through the city, right through Copley Square in the heart of the city. And they had cleared the housing. They had taken down probably hundreds and hundreds of apartments. They had cleared the roadway. It was rubble at this point. And the governor of Massachusetts, Francis Sargent, shocked everyone, said, we're not going to build this road. He decided we had too many roads and we didn't need this one. But they had already cleared the space. So they decided to take the Orange Line, which ran through parts of the city that were among the poorest parts of the city, because when they built it back at the turn of the century, they built it as an elevated train, kind that they have in Chicago. But it created kind of an ugly, noisy, dirty neighborhood, and people with money moved away, and so it ended up being a poor part of the city that it ran through. So they decided to move it and dismantle that elevated structure and move it to this area that had already been cleared and make it more of an underground subway rather than an elevated subway. So I did a film about the Orange Line being moved, and I have a lot of rare footage of the old Orange Line as it ran on those elevated tracks. I had a great photographer working on it. We got some absolutely stunning footage of trains, if that's what you're into. But I also interviewed a lot of the people in the neighborhood that it ran through, because they were probably facing gentrification. In fact, they did face gentrification when it finally happened. So these were people of modest means or even poor who were not happy necessarily that this elevated train was coming down. So we met people who lived in those communities and found out how they felt about it. And so it's a documentary about how transportation decisions can affect neighborhoods and how they can affect people when you make big decisions like that. So that's one. I did one about South Boston High School, which in the 70s was caught up in the busing controversy here in Boston. It was quite a difficult, angry, somewhat violent period in the city's history when the federal courts ordered the city to integrate its schools. Like most big cities, we had neighborhoods that were mostly black, and the schools were mostly black, and neighborhoods that were mostly white, and the schools were mostly white, and the argument was that the black neighborhoods didn't get the same resources as the white neighborhoods, and the judge agreed and said, well, you've got to integrate the schools, and the only way to do that was to bus people around the city, take people from one neighborhood to the other. Got very violent. South Boston High School became kind of a center of the opposition to busing. Southie was a very conservative neighborhood, and they did not want their high school integrated, and they did everything they could to stop it. And it ended up that the court had to put state police in the school to prevent the fighting, to keep the school open. The people in Southie wanted the school either closed or for busing to end. So it got very, very violent. Finally, the court took over the school, The court appointed its own headmaster. And at one point, I don't remember the number, but there were state police on every floor, spaced out a few feet apart to prevent fights in the school. So 10 years later, after all of this, the school was still run by that guy, the headmaster they brought in, and still run by the court. So I thought, what's going on here now? The busing controversy has calmed down. So I did a half-hour portrait of South Boston High School, which they let me hang out for days and days, and I get all kinds of great footage in different classes, interviewed a bunch of students, and the school was doing a lot better. They had a much more diverse population, and the headmaster managed to keep things under control, and they seem to be doing okay. So that's another film. What else? So I did films on housing. I did films on longshoremen in Boston.
All of these things have this activist mindset behind them. I'm really curious as to where that desire to make such a change comes from, and how all of those projects that have been so impactful, especially to the city of Boston, how those have resonated with you over the years.
I don't know that I've given it a lot of thought up until you're asking it, but I think, part of it is the fact that I was gay, and I understood that the information people had about being gay was wrong, that they were completely misunderstanding what was going on. And so part of the passion for getting to the facts and to the truth of things was that I just felt like there was a lot of misinformation out there. There always has been a lot of misinformation out there, cultural biases and other things that I felt needed correction. And that was part of, I think, what impelled me to be a journalist, because journalism was about getting to the truth of things and letting people know what was really going on so they could make reasonable decisions. And I think that was part of it. I also grew up, became politically aware during the Vietnam era, and I did a lot of reading about the war, and I knew that there was a lot of misinformation about what was going on. And so all of that combined, I think, for me to think journalism was the way to go. I wanted to be a journalist. Also, I was interested in history. I wasn't a great student, but I did okay in history. And I had become fascinated with radio. And I thought, how can I combine history and radio? And the thing that I hit upon was to be a journalist, where you're covering history as it happens on the radio and on television. So that's it. All of that kind of combined to lead me to my career.
I've really been inspired by Art's journey today, and while we've covered a lot, I know there's so much more to his story and the lessons he's learned along the way. So I thought it would be fun to dive into some rapid-fire questions to get a final glimpse at the key moments that have shaped his career. Let's dive into this week's Career Countdown. Number 5, the 5-minute documentary. So if you had to create a documentary that is just 5 minutes long, what would the subject be?
I don't have one off the top of my head, but I would look for somebody who is finding a positive way to get through life and has a message about how to manage life's distresses and emotions positively.
Number 4, what are 4 unexpected skills that you've picked up during your time in media, reporting, broadcasting, 4 skills that you never thought that you would gain?
Well, I've become much better at talking to people. Speaking in public, which was a skill that I was terrible at as a kid, but I've become much better at it. I am surprised at how comfortable I've become on air, in front of a microphone or in front of a camera. I guess that's the same thing as talking to people, but it's a slightly different thing. I think teaching has become a skill that I've acquired. I don't know how good at it I am, but I'm better than I was when I started, and there's a whole lot to learn about teaching people stuff, and I hope that I've gotten better at that. And I think I've become, in many ways, a better person because I have become more aware of the different things that affect people's lives and the way that even simple things can turn someone's life upside down, and so I'm a little more compassionate, perhaps.
Lovely. Okay. Name 3 moments of pride. We kind of touched on this already, But to recap, 3 moments in your career that you're most proud of.
Well, I'm very proud of Growing Up Gay. I'm very proud of that film, and it took a lot of courage to make. I thought it came off very well, so that's definitely one. I'm very proud of some of the reporting I did back in the day when I was covering housing in Boston, which was a disaster. Public housing was a disaster, and I'm very proud of the work I did. And I'm kind of proud of the work I did at WBZ Radio for 18 years. I didn't know that I could, talk on the radio live, without any difficulty and manage all the technology and sound like the people that I knew when I was a kid. I used to listen to these people on WBZ Radio as a kid, and I thought I could never do that. But as it turned out, I could. So I was very proud of that.
Okay, this is a good one. Who are 2 people in your life that have had a fond impact on your personal life or your career?
Well, a lot of people have had impacts on my career. Back in the day when I was starting out in the business, there was a woman named Diana Calland who was at WFCR Radio, and she was a mentor. She helped me become a better performer, announcer, just a better producer, and sort of set me off in the right direction. During the Vietnam War, I was of draft age, and I got a deferment because I was in college. And then at the end of my college career, they had a lottery for your birthday, and I got a very low number, which meant I would be drafted. And I had decided, I'd been working on this for a while, that I really was a conscientious objector to war. And so I applied for conscientious objector status. They rarely gave out that status to anyone unless you were a member of one of the religions that espoused nonviolence. But the Supreme Court had said, no, you could have people who weren't a member of those religions who sincerely believed it. And so I applied, and I had to prepare a statement. I had to write something. I had to go before the draft board and be interviewed. And there was a woman named Frances Crowe, who was a draft counselor and anti-war person, a very powerful woman from Northampton who lived to quite an old age and probably got arrested more times than I can imagine for activities against violence. And she was my draft counselor, and she helped me through it. And I met with the draft board, and I had decided that if I did not get a CO status, I would go to jail. That was the option, either go into the Army or go to jail. And I had prepared to go to jail. I met with them. I told them that was the plan. If they didn't grant me the status, I would resist and I would go to jail. A couple weeks later, I got a note in the mail that I'd been granted conscientious objector status. And I'm very proud of that. And Frances Crowe is someone who is a very important person in my life because she helped me understand these things, helped me approach these issues, and made it possible for me to pursue that CO status.
So the last question, number 1, what's one thing you hope your career will be remembered for?
I hope it'll be remembered for the documentaries that I produced, that I will be seen as a truthful storyteller who helped people understand complex things a little better than they had before they watched my work.
Did anyone else feel like we were swept into a time machine today, transported through pivotal moments in Boston's history, all through the incredible lens of Art Cohen? From the start, we asked, can journalists also be activists? Art's career doesn't just answer that, it redefines it. His work proves that when journalism is driven by purpose and heart, it has the power to spark action, challenge conventions, and leave a lasting mark on the world. Having had the privilege of learning from Art in my final year of college, I already knew him as a brilliant professor and storyteller, but hearing the depth of his passion and the boldness of his vision has left me even more inspired. His legacy is a masterclass in the transformative power of storytelling. Thanks for joining me today. I'm Layla Palmer, and I couldn't be more excited to bring you even more inspiring stories in the episodes ahead. Until then, thank you for listening.